looking at this issue of forgiveness, and it's within the family. It's in the context of believers. He emphasized that if your brother. At the beginning of the passage, at the end of the passage, it's talking about relationships among the disciples. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, this is his painful, cringing instruction to you and to me from the Scriptures. And part of the passage just makes us cringe. He says, if your brother sins against you, how many times should you forgive him? 70 times 7. I mean, Peter thought he was being very generous when he told the Lord, Lord, you told me to forgive my brother when he sins against me. Now, 7 times, right? Peter thought that was a very generous statement. The rabbis taught that you only had to forgive 3 times. The Rabbi Shammai, in his writings, taught 3 times, probably basing it on Amos chapter 1, where the Lord talks about 3 times I forgive, and then the 4th time, judgment is coming. I've been patient with you 3 different times, and he says it again, verse 3, verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, verse 13. So maybe that's the way we ought to live our lives. And so Peter says, okay, Jesus, I know you always take the teachings of the Old Testament and that pattern, and you go out further with that, so it's further than that, right? So how about 7 times? And Jesus says, how about 70 times 7? How about 70 times 7? The word for forgive that is in this passage, and is throughout this passage, this is the most common word in the New Testament for forgiveness. Aphiemi. And aphiemi means to release, to set free, to abandon. It's like these things, setting them free, releasing them, turning it loose. It's used in several places, like when the disciples were called by Jesus to follow him. He says, and they abandoned their nets. They released them. They let go of them. It's used of Jesus when he left Judea and was going to Samaria. Going through Samaria, and the Samaritan woman there, that he released, he abandoned, he walked away from Judea. It's used of the woman in John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman, and it says that she, at that point, she abandoned or released her water pots. That's what he's talking about. It's letting go of it. It's abandoning it. Man, that's a tough, tall order, isn't it? It is a tough, tall order. For every one of us, when we've been hurt, we've been violated, we've been mistreated, we've been lied about, to let it go. But listen to the glory that is found in it. In the Old Testament, even it said, a man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is glory to overlook a transgression. The Message translation says, smart people know how to hold their tongue, and their grandeur is to forgive and forget. This is like the highest of virtues. Out of love for others, to forgive them. That's a challenge, and that's hard. That's tough. When the wounds are deep and they cut to the soul, to release them, to let them go. It's King Louis XII of France who says, there's no sweeter smell than the blood of my enemy's dead body. There's a man who's got some bitterness going on, isn't there? But it's not a far cry from us either. When bitterness and resentment takes over and grabs a hold of our souls. Jesus' teaching in this passage goes Matthew 18, verse 15 through 20. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Remember the verses before this, starting in verse 15 through 20. The question was there, if your brother sins against you, Jesus taught, then go to him. Now Peter follows up on that same context and says, okay, how many times do I need to do this? How many times do I need to get it right? Up to 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I don't say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven, he starts this parable to illustrate his point. For this point, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves or his servants. He began to settle them. One who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. But since he didn't have the means to repay, his Lord commanded him to be sold along with his wife and his children and all that he had, and repayment to be made. So the slave fell to the ground and prostrated himself before him, saying, have patience with me and I'll pay you everything. And the Lord of that slave felt compassion and released him and forgave him. All right, there we get that picture. I take the debt off you. I send it away. I abandoned it. He's released him of the debt. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him a denarii. And he seized him and began to choke him, saying, pay back what you owe. So his fellow slave fell to the ground and began to plead with him, saying, have patience with me, and I will repay you. But he was unwilling and went and threw him in prison until he should pay back what he owed. So when his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were deeply grieved and came and reported to their Lord all that had happened. And summoning him, his Lord said to him, you wicked slave, because I forgave you all the debt that you pleaded with me, should you not also have had mercy on your fellow slave in the same way that I had mercy on you? And the Lord said, moved with anger, handed him over to the torturers until he should repay all that was owed him. This makes me cringe. My heavenly Father will also do the same to you if each of you does not forgive his brother from your heart. Does that make you cringe? It does to me. The Lord takes this whole matter of forgiveness very serious. And our relationships in the family of God among disciples is primarily the focus in this passage. How you treat others and how you relate to others. It's the glory of a man to learn to forgive. It's the glory of a man. Learn to be forgiving. Send it away. Let go of it. Let it fly. What we find is that when we release others to forgiveness, there's a release and a forgiveness that comes to ourselves too. You know, we start flying too. We're the ones that we find are released. When we release others,